Hello and welcome everybody to AI Ramblings, episode 30. Neal Makwana, my co-host. What do you think? We are here, 30.
I know. Who would have
It's a
thought?
milestone, I guess.
30, yeah.
Weekly, you gotta get excited about these numbers. Hopefully, regular watchers, don't worry. We won't make a fuss until I don't know 50. We'll see. But so much to talk about. It's been just as usual, just a flood of things that have been going on. We wanted to focus on again, as usual, two or three things, and kind of give our perspective on some of the stuff. The big news just lead off, I think, is Nvidia's earnings yesterday. They were the last of the big tech companies to report. They just blew it out on Q3 results. All metrics meet and beat. I used to be a Wall Street analyst. Meet and beat, meet and beat. And then very important, give good guidance. And they gave crazy guidance, 65 billion in Q4 compared to the 57 billion this quarter. And remember, they still have a huge backlog on paper of over $500 billion worth of chip orders over the next 3 or 4 years. So all of that is kind of good news. The stock actually reacted up in the aftermarket yesterday, up 5 or 6%. But then today, the market basically is still fussing with its wall of worry on AI bubble and all these circular deals. There have been more. You had both Nvidia and Microsoft invest billions into Anthropic, which already has Google and Amazon as investors, and all that cluster is going to be frenemies with OpenAI. So everyone's kind of competing everybody, and it's a mishmash, frenemies galore. And so all of this is going on. In the meantime, Wall Street's like, well, how do you account for this? And what about the depreciation schedules? I've written about it extensively. It's an issue, but it'll sort its way out. And in the meantime, these stocks have been up a lot. Last year, this year, Nvidia's up over 30%, even though, it was down a small amount today after these great numbers. So look, waves in an ocean, ebb and flow. Things go up and down. Don't get too carried away, of course, unless you're investing and trading in the markets daily, in which case you got to watch all these kind of, zigs and zags. But long term, the current picture is all the companies are committed to building as much data center compute as possible because we're going to need it. We don't know what the applications are going to be, but they're coming. And with that, we'll also have economic arrangements that can allow people to make money, or it won't. We'll see. Right now, I'm kind of leaning in the go with the flow direction. In the meantime, speaking of go with the flow, both Google and OpenAI had updates to their models. Earlier in the week, you had OpenAI announce a warmer 5.1 ChatGPT, which a lot of people were asking for, more anthropomorphizing with a warmer tone and communication and relationships and memory. And then Google just knocked it out of the park with Gemini 3, which was long awaited. And just as we went on air, there was another story about how OpenAI is internally saying, hey, this is going to require us to, hustle a little bit more to kind of compete with Gemini 3. So it's a red hot, white hot competitive market on terms of all these models. And that's a good thing for us regular users, whether we're consumers or businesses or both. And so it's exciting time, especially for you, young one, because
Yes.
your generation is going to get to use this and build on all this stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, it has been white hot, just like you said. I mean, I think there was a lot of rumblings ahead of Gemini 3, especially. A lot of people who had gotten access to it early last week were saying really good things about it, and it came out, and I think it really met those expectations. There's also rumors that Apple has been working internally to get Gemini involved with its new Siri revamp. So how all these pieces fit together, we'll hopefully find out in the next few months. But in terms of Gemini, it's great. I mean, especially from a design perspective, I've seen a lot of really cool stuff on Twitter where people are essentially able to one-shot entire apps off of prompts that are not, one-shotting apps has been possible for a bit now, but well-designed and well thought out user flows and UI UX is something maybe that's a bit newer. And Gemini 3 has been able to do pretty well. So it's leaps and bounds as always with this stuff. And we're just gonna have to see, the use cases.
No, exactly. And there's a lot of material out there already in terms of reactions to this, test cases. So, please watch that. We'll have a bunch of links in the show notes on some of the stuff we've written about it. So it's all kind of goodness. And it's, you wouldn't think there's only 1 month to go in the year and everyone is like acting like it's the beginning of a new year. It's just, this is crazy and zany, which gets us to our main topic of the episode, which is, look, despite all of this positiveness, whether it's results with bigger, newer, better models that do more things in more ways people like, etc. The investors, which have been so leaning into this, are still concerned in the backdrop of AI bubbles and so on. So that I thought would be a continued good major topic, because you've got these cross currents. I've been talking to investors. I was also at a number of investor conferences, and this is the topic on everyone's mind. It's really funny because most of the public investors, yeah, they acknowledge about the AI bubble, and everyone, given my background, having been kind of at the table on the internet stocks and all that. What do you think? Blah blah blah. But in the meantime, they go into all these meetings and one-on-ones with various companies in AI, and they're like, "Yeah, I'll take 5%, I'll take 10%," and they're investing. By the way, the other thing is, despite all the world's issues on economics, tariffs, trade, supply chain issues, a lot of capital out there. It's just people are looking to figure out how to put capital to work. So it is relatively risk on, and of course they'll adjust for risks and reward and premiums and all of that stuff. The last thing I'll say on the AI bubble question is, this period is also unusual. It's not just one quote bubble. There's a whole separate set of separate things going on with, if you look at the stocks that are involved in those categories, they've also had tremendous runs, and you could argue are over their skis on valuation. I'm specifically talking about crypto. Quantum is another area. I had an investor, very smart investor, bring out a list asking my views on 5 or 6 categories of things beyond AI. AI infrastructure was as one of the lines. He had crypto. He had space. Space investing is a big category. He had self-driving. I had heated discussions with a number of some of the smartest investors on where self-driving is, and they're all excited. You look at their eyes are shining when they talk about just having taken delivery of a Tesla Model X, which is the most expensive Tesla, with the 14.0 full self-driving software, and they're like gushing like kids on Christmas, how amazing it is and so on. And at the same time, we're concerned about these other issues. So what I'm getting at is, we're at a period where, yes, you have to always adjust and think about financial valuations and risk reward. But, typically it's been my experience, when people are talking about AI bubbles, that's when AI bubble dislocations tend not to happen. So this is a kind of climbing a wall of worry kind of an environment. And so it's just an interesting period. I just wanted to highlight that and talk about that. And then the other wrinkle on the main topic that I wanted to add is, just on an innovation basis, is that there is also a big change coming in terms of language models evolving into world models. You've had a number of companies that are now talking about, hey, we need to expand beyond just scarfing up all the data on the internet, and now we need to teach these models how to look at the real world through video content, through simulations, through synthetic data creation for robots, world models. Jan LeCun, who's been the chief AI scientist at Meta, just announced, he's going to leave Meta. Meta looks like they'll invest in his company, his startup, but he's going to do world models. Fei-Fei Li, who's a renowned AI researcher at Stanford, has a critical company. There's a bunch of these things that are going on, and Google, OpenAI, they're all focused on this world model category. And I just wanted to add that into the mix of these topics of innovation on the one hand, and all the concerns about AI bubbles and valuation on the other, and all sitting on a mountain of capital that's all looking for new cool things to invest in. So that's a very combustible situation. It continues, I think, more than gets interrupted, because we're at the early cycle of these innovations. But I did want to highlight all of that in the stew that is going to make us hopefully some delicious stew or chili. What do you think, Neal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just as you said. It's a sentiment I hear a lot, that if we're talking about a bubble and a worry about a bubble, there's a decent chance that that's not what we're in right now. And I think this idea of a wall of worry is very true. It's a hot topic right now. I can't I can't see a single person online right now that's not talking about, are we in a bubble? Where are we at right now in this phase of the tech wave? But I think what you highlighted is key is that in these areas, I think it's really important to also take into account that this type of stuff has been seen before. I mean, you were around for the internet bubble that I obviously wasn't around for, but I've heard and the stories about. And even though this is unique in its own way, there are still things that we can take from that, as a precedent of source and apply here. And I think that's what a lot of people need to keep at the forefront of their mind.
No, glass half full, glass half empty. And pour yourself a little bit extra water and enjoy the drink. So let us move on to our watch and read of the week. I think you have a good one, and
Yeah.
it's a topic that we've talked about, but please
Yeah, so
go
mine
ahead.
is a article from The Verge. Actually, it's titled "The DoorDash Problem: How AI Browsers Are a Huge Threat to Amazon." As you mentioned, we have discussed this a bit, but it takes the recent battle that Perplexity has had with Amazon, and which Amazon sued Perplexity due to the fact that Perplexity and AI browsers by nature are doing this job of cutting out a lot of the friction that what some may call friction of online shopping, where instead of having to go and search on a place like Amazon, you can just prompt that you want your shopping list to be bought, and it'll go and do all the work for you via an agent. And Amazon is alleging, of course, that this is affecting their flow and how they expect people to interact with their site, because of course things like advertisements and promotions and pop-ups are how these companies get people to buy more, and Amazon's a bit worried that this will cut out a bit of that, and it's framed in an interesting way, highlighting how DoorDash maybe created a similar problem back when it and things like Uber Eats launched, a couple of years ago. Instead of people interacting directly with the restaurant with what would have been originally checking a website, either placing an order through the company's website, which was rare, you'd usually just call and or order takeout, and this is how they'd be able to sell you that, hey, we have this deal, we have that deal, or buy one get one free. And DoorDash created this space where it kind of acted as a middleman, and maybe in the view of some restaurants affected their business. But it can also be viewed in a way, it's as we always talk about, glass half full, glass half empty. Platforms like DoorDash democratize the ability to order takeout, and these things eventually rippled onto its platform. So I think something to take into account here also is that Perplexity is still early, AI browsers are still early, as we always say with this stuff. And I think it's going to take time to kind of propagate through and for these things to get ironed out. But it's a good piece that discusses it and kind of just hammers home on something we've been talking about for a bit now.
No, I second this. I really enjoyed this piece as well. So we'll really recommend this. The one thing I will say on this is Nilay Patel, who's the editor in chief of The Verge. This has been a really core issue for him. He does it on his Decoder podcast. He does these interviews with CEOs of tech companies, and he brings this up constantly. So it's interesting because it's a very well edited piece. It's a quick 20 minutes. Really recommend you guys watch it. Two things I would add to this, number one, look, whenever new technologies come about, and we've talked about this, it's going to change the internet, generally for the better. Agents are just another set of technologies, have been predicted for a long time, 30 years. I took General Magic public, in 95, way too early, and we are these agents now. And yes, these are new things that go do things for people, and there's always tension in terms of the supply and the demand side of it, and business models have to be sorted out and negotiated, and there's always an ebbs and flows. And it's never just binary. Oh, this thing's going to win and this thing's going to lose. People will figure out where the value is. And more than often, it creates new, totally addressable markets. It expands markets. And that's the toughest thing that we have to contend with as investors or users. We tend to think of the world, in terms of what we know and what we feel, what we can touch, whether it's on the consumer side, which is what Neal talks about here, the consumer experience of agents. And then there's an equally big, massive debate, same thing on the enterprise, which Neal does not talk about. Agents, every enterprise software company, Microsoft, Salesforce, this whole SaaS industries, software as a service industry, they're all running around with agents to help people do things, etc. The core thing I would say, in addition to agents running around trying to do things for people, whether it's on the consumer or the business side, is while every company is offering their own agents and so on, there's going to be a lot of tension. and competition. But most of these are going to be vertical siloed agents. And what we have to watch for is is a company either on the consumer side or the enterprise side that somehow creates a horizontal model with agents. In other words, their agents are so amazing and people like them so much because these agents remember everything about you and do all these cool things across everything and so on and so forth. Now, that's not been invented. People like OpenAI, et cetera, are dreaming about it, etc. But if it's a horizontal thing, that truly can create another monster big tech company that could create entire value proposition that everyone can and will have to adjust to and create a new reality on the internet. That could happen as well. It's also very exciting. But those two things I would mention. Number is one, it's all kind of vertical siloed agents, consumer or business competing with each other. Business model will get figured out. And then is there either on the consumer or on the enterprise side, a company that breaks through and creates a horizontal agent that just works for you across all services, does things that no other service can do individually on any of these sites, in which case you've got a whole new value proposition and something to watch. And that's the exciting glass half full thing I would mention this. My read of the week,
Definitely.
given everything we're talking about, innovation and market fears and AI bubble fears, because I've been doing some plane rides and so on, I'm going through Andrew Ross Sorkin's new book, 1929. Highly recommended. It's my read of the week. I'm halfway through. And look, I know everyone knows the expression history echoes, history rhymes, it's true. Everything we're discussing that we've discussed on this show, other shows, new technologies, worries, and flows of markets. None of this is new. People have been debating these things for centuries in other tech waves and so on. And Andrew does a great job just focusing on the period of a few days in 1929, which was obviously the epic crash of 1929. He gives you a lot of sense of what happened in America at the dawn of the century in terms of the country getting comfortable with debt. They're supposed to buy cars, appliances, houses. The big personalities, they had their own Elon Musks. They had their own major politicians like Donald Trump. They had all of this, and we've forgotten it in the midst of time, especially you younguns who tend to read less and watch
Yeah.
more YouTube videos,
Yes.
which is good. There'll be hopefully good YouTube videos on this, but I would put this as a good, solid read of the week, if only to give you all just, and look at it, everything's not going to be the exact same as in 1929, but there are a lot of echoes and a lot of rhymes. And so I would highlight that as my read of the week in the context of
Wonderful.
all the big issues we're talking about today. That takes us to our obsession of the week, Neal
Yes.
Makwana.
Mine is one that maybe most people didn't expect to see when they woke up this morning, but Google and specifically Android announced that they have created a feature called Quick Share, which is their version of AirDrop. But not only is it their version of AirDrop, it's compatible with AirDrop. They essentially took AirDrop, reverse engineered it, and have now done something that puts Apple, I think, in a very interesting position because Apple, of course, for years has been going head to head with Google, more Apple than Google on the whole green bubbles versus blue bubbles. Blue bubbles, of course, being iMessage, and green bubbles being what's displayed on iPhones whenever a non-iPhone texts. This is a bit adjacent to that. I think it puts Apple in an interesting position because you can argue that if Apple does shut this down somehow, which I wouldn't be surprised if they do, does Google go after them on an area like antitrust? I think there's a lot of different routes that this could play out. In the end, I think it's good for us because as nice as it is to tease people who have Android phones about the whole thing, it would be nice to have an open system to some extent where things are maybe made a bit easier. And this is a step in that direction. We'll see how it plays out on Apple's side. I guess the ball is in Apple's court, as you would say here. But it's just interesting new development today.
No, well, I love it. It's competition. Competition makes it good for us consumers, and I
Yes.
love it. And again, none of this is binary. These are big boys. These are big companies, and yes, one can sue the other and all that. But remember, they're also frenemies. I mean, Apple makes over almost 15 to $20 billion from Google, basically allowing Google to do search across all of its 2+ billion iPhone devices. And now they're going to pay $1 billion or more to Google for Gemini, as you mentioned earlier, to power Siri. These are all negotiations. It's, these are business deals ultimately.
Exactly.
And they will have to continue to innovate. on top of AirDrop and do more cool things around this. But it's great to see Google continuing to hustle and bring a key feature that has been on the Apple side for a long time onto the Android side of the ledger. So I love it. My obsession of the week is it's a little geeky. I've talked about it in the last couple of shows. I'm a gamer at heart, etc. And one company I admire is Steam, Valve, and they announced some very cool hardware initiatives, which I talked about last week. There were some additional write-ups on it, which I'll put in the show notes. You guys, if you're into games and so on, do look at this. It's really cool innovation at a core level. But the obsession for me this week is how Linux, which is a core operating system, open source underneath. And by the way, Linux is an underpinning into Mac OS and a bunch of other, Unix and other systems, etc. That's very too geeky for most people on this show. But the core idea here is that Linux, is part of Steam and Valve, is now turning out to be a better way to game than on Windows, which has been the central place to game for decades. And these companies are figuring out how to take games for Windows, emulated because of much stronger processors on Linux, and give you a much better experience, smoother, faster, etc. And so you've got a lot of geeks out there who are like, oh my God, I got to do more Linux things and so on. And so I love these kinds of conversations. It's a little deep in the techie stuff, but a lot of fun because they're clues to what could come. And remember, Microsoft at this point has very little directly touching the consumer other than their Windows PCs are 70-80% of the unit market around the world. The Xbox games are big. Obviously, a couple of years ago, they spent $70 billion by Activision, but they're losing the gaming initiative because Windows is a clunky way to kind of play games, especially on newer devices like handhelds and so on. And so these things with Linux and so on are turning into interesting alternatives over the next couple of
Yeah.
years. And so it's an obsession of mine. So that takes us to our burning questions, Neal. What's your burning
Yes.
question?
Yeah, mine has to do with this discussion that I feel like we have every week, but we have for a good reason, is because I think it's a bit of a trend that's taken everyone by surprise. And I guess it's to no surprise by the way they're designed, but it has to do with this topic of anthropomorphizing. I struggle to say there. They should have really made that word a bit easier to say, considering
I
how
know.
much
That's why I use humanizing AI.
we say it exactly. So it
Anthropomorphizing.
it
I feel good
combines
when I
two
actually
of
manage to
our
say it.
I know it's like a challenge every time. Okay, so my question combines two things that we discussed, which is that humanizing AI, but also this concept of wake words and the struggles that we have with all of our home devices. My question is, I was using, Siri the other day, which I know I never use, by the way, because it's not good to, as everyone knows. But it's sort of to think a bit of, it may have been obvious, but it kind of started clicking for me is that is some of this also on the company's part, in terms of not fault, but do you think that the wake words are contributing to this humanization? How much of a part do you think they play? Because, I also don't see that many people interacting with these services using voice. I think a majority right now is still text. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, what role
It's
you
a
think that
great
plays.
question. Look, you and I have been very clear on our position on anthropomorphizing AIs and humanizing. Don't do it. Don't let friends do it, etc. Wake words are a dear obsession of mine for a long time. You may not know this, but years ago I was involved with a startup where I was part of actually getting a patent on a totally, utterly different way to do wake words, which is, I think all of these companies are stuck in a rut. Basically, there's one or just basically one wake word. Google has their thing, the G word, and Apple has the S word, and Amazon has the A word. Amazon is the only company actually that gives you options for 4 wake words, and most of my devices have the word computer because I like to not humanize these things. And my inspiration is Star Trek. And so what I'm getting at is, yes, wake words, I think giving universal choice on wake words is the real UI UX thing that these companies should be thinking, especially as they add LLM AIs into this stuff. Why? Look, people love to humanize this stuff. As much as you and I, or me especially, rant against humanizing this stuff, that's what people will do. Half the households in America have pets. Same thing around the world, and our pets have crazy names. Why can't our computers have crazy names if we're going to do this humanizing thing? And it actually potentially solves problems that we have. When I say the A word or the G word right now, 16 devices go go off at the same time. It was really weird. I was at a conference. Give you a funny example. I'm sitting in the back, minding my own business. There's a panel up there. They're talking about all this AI, and someone mentions the word Google, and one of my phones starts to go all AI loudly in the thing and starts to opine on the panelists.
Wow.
And I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. I literally had to get up, grab my stuff, and leave the room. The whole room was laughing and so on. That's a wake word problem. They
Yeah.
have to engineer this. Please, Sundar, Satya, Sam, fix this problem. The wake word sensitivity issue is a massive one. We need to make these damn systems a lot smarter. They're all listening all the time. They all want to jump in. They all want to be helpful. We talked about ChatGPT trying to be warmer. It's not just the wake words, it's the engineering around the wake words. If we're going to humanize or anthropomorphize these things, look, kids in kindergarten learned how to not all talk at the same time and only jump up or when they're called on. You know, come up with technical solutions on a UI UX basis. So I love this wake word question. There's a lot of innovation to be done on this, and it's a real problem. And my experience in this conference was just a case in point. So
Crazy.
just I thought I'd mention that because it was very
Yeah.
real, and I had a red face on this one. So my burning question for you, Neil, to end the show is, you've been an avid user of AI browsers. We've talked a lot about it. One of the discussions I had in one of the panels was on prompt injections in AI browsers, which is a way for the bad actors to put a lot of bad stuff into AI browsers, etc., through sites that you visit, etc. Given that you've been an avid user of one of them, can you talk about how you deal personally with the issue of security and
Yeah.
concerns around trust and so on around your daily
Yeah.
use?
There are a lot of concerns that I have, and I honestly have maybe eased back a bit on how we discussed with ChatGPT Atlas. I used it for maybe total of an hour, and I realized that this wasn't good enough, and I basically deleted it off my computer and haven't touched it since. The only one I'm still using is Comet by Perplexity, but even that one I've tapered off a bit. I'm actually using Chrome a bit more with Gemini, also just due to the fact that when I really took a step back, the AI features built into these browsers, other than stuff like auto summaries, we're not really adding much value to where the trade-off of my security and my privacy was worth it, and especially in areas like prompt injection. I'm a bit more comfortable with Chrome and with the way that Google is handling things. But, it's something we've discussed, but I think it also comes from the company that's behind it. I'm more likely to trust a Google or an Apple, of course, than I am a Meta or potentially even an OpenAI. So it's really a case to case thing. But to answer your question, I have honestly tapered off a bit on how much I use these things, just because it is getting to a point now where I'm having to be, a bit careful,
Good point. Well, I mean, these are all interesting anecdotal learnings from all this as the stuff
Yeah.
races ahead, and we have to kind of be very mindful. So, thank you for sharing that. And with that, I think we end our episode 30 of AI Ramblings. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us. And as usual, any comments, suggestions, always welcome. Please like and subscribe. It helps us with the show algorithms. And we look forward to seeing you again next week on episode 31.
31.
Thank you so
See
much.
you next.
Stay tuned.